I'm Dr Emma Craythorne, a consultant dermatologist, and I'm really excited to be here today with Clara while we talk about skin health, general health during the perimenopausal and menopausal time, and our nutritional health. This is the window of opportunity for many women, and it's so important to understand our entire organism as well as our skin so that we can make those really important changes that potentially need to be made at this time of our lives. So I think it's just going to be wonderful to hear from such great experts, and we're looking forward to today.
I'm Charlotte Hunter and I'm a nutritionist, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joining Clara here today on the panel talking about skin and menopause, two really important subjects, and hopefully we're going to be stripping everything back and giving people no nonsense, realistic, usable advice for skin and health and nutrition.
I'm Dr Sigi Joseph, a GP and women's health expert, and delighted to be here at this Clara event where we hope to dispel some of the myths around perimenopause and menopause care and really empower people to optimise their health during this important time.
Hello, hi and welcome. Welcome to this lovely session where we are joined by three incredible experts, the incredible Dr Emma Craythorne. Can we have a round of applause? Thank you. Dr Sigi Joseph. And Charlotte Hunter. Now, yes, correct. So we could go into a very long introduction to try and cover everything that you do, everything that you are, and everything that you have achieved and continue to do with all three of you, actually. But it would take me about 45 minutes for each of them, and we do not have that time. So, Emma, would you mind introducing yourself for our lovely guests?
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. I recognise lots of faces that are familiar, and welcome to everybody else who I hope to get to meet later. I'm Dr Emma Craythorne. I'm a consultant dermatologist. I've been working in dermatology for a bit more than 20 years now, and I am just fascinated with every single aspect of the skin. I have my NHS practice, which sees some extreme ends of the disease spectrum, and then I have my private practice, which also sees those levels of diseases, but also is concerned with people who already have pretty good skin, how to try and get it that bit better or great. I also have a TV series where the first episode went out of series 7 last night, and I just love everything to do with the skin, so that's really what's brought me here today. I set up Clara because I had a passion to try and help as many people as possible in the most luxurious way with the best evidence to get the skin that they really want to have. It's a very no-nonsense approach. It's like going to see a dermatologist, essentially, and hopefully you'll all get to experience it for yourselves later, and I know many of you are already on it.
Dr Sigi, would you mind doing the same? So again, so many things I could say. In a nutshell, she's the nation's favourite GP, but let's be more specific.
Hi, thanks for coming, everyone. I'm Sigi Joseph. I have been a GP for 22 years. With an NHS practice of about 6,500 patients, but also subspecialist as a women's health expert. So within Scotland, I've done an awful lot on women's health policy and wrote the women's health plan, educating for 23 years. I've educated over 1,000 doctors and nurses, and have a real passion, like Emma, to really dispel, make sure there's good evidence-based information getting to our population so that people can really look after themselves in the right way. In general practice, a lot of preventative health has gone out the window. So separately, I have a company where we go into corporate environments and we teach people who are well around how to stay well. So that's in women's health and also stress and cholesterol and diet. And using some of that corporate sponsorship to go to areas of deprivation, like working with Ukraine refugees and Women's Aid. And part of writing the Women's Health Plan ended up going on the news a lot, so I tend to go on STV and the BBC News explaining a lot around women's health or actually workforce crisis or anything that's topical, mainly in Scotland. So, and also happen to be one of Emma's good friends. Yeah, delighted to be here.
My favourite thing that I discovered this morning is they met during Freshers Week, and that was it. They decided they'd be friends.
I was very lucky.
I was.
And finally, we have lovely Charlotte Hunter, who is a nutritionist.
Yeah, so I'm a nutritionist, and I specialise in working with women over 40 mainly on the weight loss side of things, but also just generally supporting women to be healthier, happier, going through their perimenopause and menopause. I do lots of different things within my work. I do lecturing, training, mentoring of other nutritionists, and just lots of things. So just lots of bits and pieces, really. So little bits of writing, and I work for a number of corporate and wellness companies in the menopause space.
Now, if you've agreed to come here today, you know that we're talking about the fact that menopause is not a skin type, but is it a skin concern? And I think that we have 3 experts who are all coming at it from a different perspective, who have a huge amount of experience of treating patients and seeing cases in clinic, and are able to say, actually, at the moment, there's menopause slapped on many, many things out there, whether it's a supplement, a skincare cream, a powder that you mix into something. But actually, it's not about going for something that's sort of very mainstream and just has something slapped on it. It's about really getting in tune with yourself. So can we just, for context, talk about what perimenopause is and what menopause is, and maybe also touch on postmenopause?
So I think sometimes the terminology is really confusing, and you'll see different platforms use menopause when really they mean perimenopause, and likewise in the postmenopause. So to kind of explain it briefly, menopause in itself is actually a medical term that we use for one specific day of a woman's life. So 12 months after your last bleed, that would be your menopause day. So that's a single day. And everything that happens before that is your perimenopause. And every woman's experience will be very different. And so that's why the individualized approach is really important. Some women will have very few symptoms for a few months, and then there'll be a proportion of women that have very severe symptoms for a long time. But really, your perimenopause can start as early as 10 years before that menopause date. And then everything after that one day, that menopause day, is called your postmenopause. And in today's world, we're all living longer. So most women will live up to a third of their lives, if they're lucky enough to live nice and healthy, long lives, in that postmenopause. So optimizing your health is absolutely crucial in that perimenopause, and really addressing your health concerns at that point, because that's what gives you the really good health in the postmenopause.
And I think as well, when it comes to perimenopause and menopause, it's almost this thing that you should be scared of, that it's this thing that's going to creep up on you, and your life that up until that point that has been lovely, your skin that up until that point maybe you've got a handle on, you know exactly what products work, or maybe you have a certain way of eating and then one day all of a sudden your food makes you bloat. It's this thing that just sort of hits you out of the blue, and then you're going to flounder. But that isn't the case, is it?
No, it's not the case. I mean, one of the key things that I suppose to understand when we think about for our skin, for example, is that we want to really try and understand how our skin behaves at every aspect of our lives. So you want to know potentially if you're somebody who already has a little bit of skin sensitivity, you want to know that in your 20s and 30s, well, because you can act on it in your 20s and 30s and 40s, but also around your perimenopausal time or going into your postmenopausal time. A lot of those skin issues actually end up becoming worse because of the changes in estrogen levels that occur. So, for example, when your estrogen levels are lower, you know that your barrier protection of your skin is typically not going to be quite so good. So if you're somebody who has a bit of sensitivity already, then around that time, you might start to notice that your eczema has come back, or you're getting itchy, crawly sensations over your skin. And a lot of that is to do with these fluctuations and changes in the estrogen. And likewise, if you're somebody who perhaps had maybe a little bit of excess oiliness in your skin as in your 20s or 30s, or you had acne as a teenager, you might actually start to notice that start to creep back in your mid-30s, early 40s, because again, your dip in your estrogen levels means you've got more of this free testosterone, and that free testosterone will then lead to the hormonal changes that people see with spots, hair where you don't want it, and losing hair where you actually do want it. So all of those changes are really key to understand, and you can start making those changes well before your perimenopausal time, but then really address them in that time with kind of good hormonal control, diet control, and of course, good topical skincare.
So let's talk about the food element of this as well, because I talked about, I think many of us probably have that thing where you feel like you can sort of eat what you want-ish, and then there's a day that it's like, oh no, that's not true anymore, and that can be quite a tough day. Yeah. Is that something you experience with your patients?
Definitely. And when clients come to see me, they don't come to me and say, you're a menopause nutritionist, can you help me with all of these things? They just happen to be women who are usually over 40, and that's probably the main thing they mention to me and say, I don't feel like myself, my skin looks dull, but the worst thing is that I've just started putting on belly fat, from nowhere. I'm eating the same, my exercise regime is the same, what's happening? And it's really stressful for women because it's that sort of, a lot of people just don't understand why it's happening. But as we transition through menopause, or perimenopause rather, we experience those changes in our hormones, which affects our body composition quite significantly. So our skeletal, lean body mass is reduced, and we get more of the visceral fat, which is that fat that hangs around in places we don't want it, like your tummy. And it's really bad for you. It's dangerous because it's very metabolically active, and it's part of a wider picture of cardiovascular changes in our bodies as well. So although it might seem like, oh, I've just put a bit of belly fat on, or I can't eat as much as I used to, there's sort of more sinister background, isn't there? I know it sounds quite alarmist, doesn't it? But I think it's really important that we think about this, because it is something you can change. I think a lot of women think, oh, well, I'm going through menopause, I'm just going to look like my mum or my mother-in-law. Sorry to everyone's mums out there. But that's actually what a lot of people say. They'll say, I'm just turning into my mum, or I'm turning into my mother-in-law, and I've got to do something about this. But, you can change what you're eating, how you're eating, and they make more of a difference compared to, what you're actually eating, if that makes sense. So it's not so much the types of food you eat, it's very often the composition of those foods.
And I think as well, you said something interesting a while ago about people will just come to you and say, just put me on a menopause diet.
Yeah.
And I'm sure people say, just give me a cream that will work. And I'm sure people will say, just put me on HRT. And it'll be like, done. But what we're really trying to emphasize here is it is about taking a few steps back and looking at, right, how does food make me feel? Or what might the impact of that particular topical skincare be? Or what this lifestyle change? But that's actually a longer project, isn't it? It isn't a magic bullet. And is that sort of part of the problem?
Massively, yeah. I mean, there just isn't a menopause diet. I mean, if you look on social media, you probably think otherwise because everyone's vlogging some kind of diet. But the diet that you need will be very unique to you. So one person may do really well on a lower fat diet, someone else may do better on a lower carb, or everything in between. But I think it's pretty much the same as what you said, Emma, about knowing your body or knowing your skin. If you know your body, you can see those changes. And if something's changed and it's different, you can do something about it normally. It's a little sign to go, well, actually, I should maybe look into this.
Let's talk about the different sort of fluctuating hormone situation, because perimenopause, menopause, obviously, there are some significant changes in one's hormones. But I think women go through life constantly navigating these sorts of shifts for various reasons, whether it's because you have PCOS. I had a very turbulent puberty thanks to PCOS, but then throughout our lives there may be pregnancies, there may be contraception, and so we're constantly sort of having to keep an eye on things, so to speak. And then you come into perimenopause and menopause, don't you?
So you're absolutely correct. The life cycle actually of our hormones from the moment we start our periods, it can be quite turbulent. It's getting to understand how your body reacts to your cycle, and if your cycle's really regular, you might be able to really predict those side effects that you get. But if you've got PCOS or endometriosis, it might be very irregular. And then you get to the stage when you're looking at perimenopause, and what's happening is the key hormones, so our estrogen, our progesterone, and our testosterone, the balances are all changing. And the tricky part with perimenopause is you might have a week where your estrogen levels are quite good, and then they'll drop off a cliff, and then they'll go right up, and then they'll go back down. So over weeks to months, it can be more like this. So when you were saying about, a patient who says, can I just get HRT? Well, HRT has a really positive place, and it's complex with prescribing HRT. There's different preparations, there's different dosing. And when we're trying to replace the hormone, what we're doing is trying to give you a stable level of estrogen and progesterone. Meanwhile, your own body, depending on your age and stage of perimenopause, will still be going like this. So what the doctors are trying to do is just give you that really consistent approach so that you feel better, so that you're sleeping better, and then you can make some healthy lifestyle choices, get the exercise in. But it's that very individualised thing, just like the skincare and the diet changes, that are really important, because actually what suited you as the individual isn't going to maybe suit your best friend or your sister, and it's getting that good individualised advice.
And so when you are taking something like HRT, it's not just about the HRT, it's about, right, this is allowing me to have space to do other things that will make me feel better too.
So the other really thing that I see time and time again is once a person is on HRT, so if HRT is suitable for you and you've got no contraindications, and once you get your dose right, so again, it's a bit of a science, there's different ways to take it, patches, sprays, gels, tablets. Once we get the dose correct and then we work up the way to the correct dosing, often a woman will start to feel much better. So then they feel like socialising. So they'll get out and get that connection. Then they feel like actually making better healthy eating choices because they're feeling a bit more motivated to perhaps lose the weight or get the exercise. And maybe they're, enjoying life a bit more, so they drink a little bit less alcohol. Because often we know when your sleep's poor, women often turn to alcohol, particularly in our 40s and 50s. But that has the kind of contraindicative effect of actually worsening your sleep and worsening your anxiety. So I see time and time again, once we get the balance of hormones right, and once their skin's looking better, they're feeling a bit more less anxious and happier in themselves, then they feel more motivated to say, actually, I'm going to meet my friends for a walk instead of meet them for lots and lots of wine and chips or, whatever. They make better choices.
Do you find as well, I think for all three of you, that women might come to you and they will have suddenly experienced a shift, whether it's in their skin, how they feel, or their diet, or in their body. And this doesn't sound very compassionate, and it isn't meant to be horrible or harsh, but is it almost like they haven't been paying attention until something goes wrong? And actually that's the key, to pay attention, to know what works for you long before you experience anything that might knock you off balance a bit.
A little bit. I mean, I think that certainly in medicine, we are kind of have a culture where we wait until someone gets sick before we make them better. And actually, really, what's probably needs to change, and what is changing, is that how do we keep people better so that they don't get sick? There are some regions of China where the doctors are paid for people not coming to visit them. So they try to keep their population healthy so they don't actually need to see the doctor, which is actually a pretty clever way of practicing medicine. And in a way, the same thing really happens with the skin. Most people's skin has a susceptibility to fall a certain way. So for many of you who have done the Klira consultation questions already, you'll start to understand that what this means is people have a skin barrier. The skin barrier can either be a fairly sensitive skin barrier or a fairly strong resistant skin barrier. You might be somebody who's prone to bits of pigmentation with just the hint of sunlight, whereas other people that doesn't happen to. For some people, they might have overexposed their skin or have genetic reasons why they break their collagen down more quickly. Other people don't have that. And then for some people, they have an oilier skin type and they're making much more sebum, or their sebum's a bit stickier than others. Now, these are the kind of ways that we as a dermatologist think of trying to keep your skin, this is on your face, as good and as healthy as possible. And when we start a skincare routine, it's typically thinking about these factors. But everybody has that already, and you can put really good things in place so that if you are somebody who does have this slightly sensitive skin barrier in your 20s and 30s, well, right skincare practice and good skincare practice means that you might not be the one that then runs into trouble with it in your perimenopausal and postmenopausal time. Equally, protecting those fibroblasts and the collagen, if you're somebody who's really prone to breaking that down quickly, using the right topical skincare at that time, and in advance is something to kind of prepare your skin so you're not going to lose as much around the perimenopausal time. We lose around about I think it's 25 to 30% just in this very short period of time in our lives. So we get wrinkling, we get skin sagging, and all of those things, the dullness that can appear within the skin, is just because of the kind of slower turnover of the cells. So by understanding the type of skin that you truly have early on and putting the right things into place means that you then will have your skin looking better for longer. And the same thing holds true, and Sigi is testament to this, because, you know, this is her practice, is trying to keep women healthy, not living necessarily longer, but living really well for a longer period of time. And it's about this idea of prevention to keep people living better. And the skin is essentially an extension of that.
And Charlotte, you said something really interesting about if you get your diet right, it kind of knocks out the noise.
Yeah, definitely. I think for a lot of reasons. Firstly, when we think about perimenopause, it's a really volatile time. Everything's up and down, as you were saying, Sigi, you know, just up and down from 1 week, 1 month to the next. And if you're able to sort your diet out, that's one thing you can control. You know, your hormones might be going nuts, but at least, you know, if you can manage your diet, your carbohydrate intake, your energy balance, all of those things will just make you feel much more in control. And also, I think if you can get your diet right, you're laying the right foundations for your health, for the short term and the longer term. And it means you can, as you said, just wipe out all that noise, you know, ignore the fad diet and the crazy supplements and the, you know, the next game-changing product that someone's got. But just starting with the basics and getting your diet nailed in a very simple way, I think is absolutely the best place to start.
And is that something that you...
Yeah, actually, what I was going to pick up is actually Emma made this point earlier, is it's not necessarily that we've not been paying attention. I think it's really hard to pay attention when you're particularly at this stage of our lives. A lot of us have careers, we might have young children, we might have elderly people in our lives that we're caring for. And Emma was talking about this earlier, about this idea of the care sandwich that we're often in. And life is busy and we're trying to see, so it's often quite hard to pay attention to what are my symptoms, what am I experiencing. So that's one way that you can really try and stay ahead of it and just start to really try and spend some time, whether it's every day or every week, going, how have I been feeling, where am I with my hormones, what side effects? Because I think the modern day pressures makes it harder for particularly women to really have that time to reflect on themselves. I think, yeah.
Well, also, anyone living today will probably say they're stressed, probably say they're not getting good quality sleep. And all of these things also tie into what you might be feeling when your hormones are beginning to change. So it could be easy to just dismiss them and think, oh, I'll try meditation. Yeah. And while that might be something of a balm, it won't be the kind of fix that people are hoping it will be.
No, and we were hearing stories of people going to see their doctor, probably with perimenopausal symptoms, some even what we'd call premature menopause, which is before the age of 40, which is even more important to pick up. And people being told, oh, you're too young, or this isn't it. So I would definitely say, take a note of your symptoms, map your symptoms, take them to the doctor. And if you're not being heard, then try and see a different doctor who maybe in the practice knows more about it, because it's very important that you get the right help.
We know that, particularly there was a documentary last week, menopause has become a very hot topic. And the whole idea of it was to enable women access to great information to empower them so that they didn't have to go through this sort of silently, quietly, or be anyway embarrassed about the fact that they were going through perimenopause and menopause. But we have definitely seen that menopause gets slapped on a lot of things. And I'm just curious, seeing as we are working towards personalised everything, I'm just curious what damage you think that is doing and why it's so important that we get this personalised, get to know yourself message out there.
I find it incredibly frustrating because it really is simply just being used as a marketing tool. And as Sigi said, menopause is just one day, so it doesn't even make scientific sense that everybody's doing all of these things for one day in someone's life. But even generically, in fact, even just giving just skincare advice to an entire room to say, okay, you put this moisturising cream on and that's the thing for you. Yeah, it might be the thing for 7 of the people in the room, but for the other people, it might be the completely wrong moisturising cream. And for a few of you might actually be allergic to it. So this idea of giving generic advice on anything is, I think, incredibly frustrating. In dermatology, we find it incredibly frustrating that a lot of information is given as if that is for the population as a whole, and it really truly is not. And from I suppose an ethical perspective, I find it really angering that this is a time where it's essentially preying on people at probably a slightly vulnerable time where, yes, they are busy with the things that you talked about, childcare, elderly parents, busy being at work. Wake up, you're at a day where your estrogen levels have dipped a bit, you look a bit shit when you look in the mirror and you think, oh, now I'm going to have to go and buy that cream because it says it's for use at this time. And so I think that it's from an ethical perspective, I feel like it's quite a wrong thing to be doing. But from a medical perspective, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And from your clinic, where you're talking to people about food and their diets, do you find that they come armed with supplementation galore because their first port of call before employing your help is to go to the local shop and look at something herbal that might help?
You have no idea. You wouldn't believe the stuff people bring in. And I think, actually, it's going back to just what you were saying before, Emma, about when people first come to us. And I think the really sad thing about nutrition is it's always at the bottom of the list. And I would love to say it's changing. It's changing a little bit, but not enough, I don't think. And by the time people come and see me, they've been on the websites, they've been, doing the rounds on social media, they've talked to friends, magazines, TV shows, and that's where the bag of supplements comes from. And it's difficult because they go through each one. I'll say, well, I take this for this, this for this, I take this for my headache, this for my sleep. And I'm sure some of you are guilty out there. I mean, I know I've got quite a big drawer of supplements. But I think really, this idea of needing a menopause supplement is just a bit shady. I think there are really good products out there, and I do use some of them, and they are called menopause formulas, but they're within the recommended amounts of nutrients. They've got a really nice foundational aspect to them. And I think they have a place and be really useful, if you're just wanting to support your diet. But it's always got to be food first. And also remembering there will be people in the population who may be at a high risk of deficiency. So vegans, vegetarians, if you're on a free-from diet, you're avoiding fish or meat or dairy, whatever it's going to be. So I think in those cases you have to be quite careful, and we can do testing, your doctor can help you as well. But I think we do have to be careful of some of the crazy claims around supplements, and that they're going to fix your hot flushes and they're going to, turn your life around.
There's something quite sinister about this implied benefit, isn't there? In the way that just because it's got an ingredient that you might know has some link to improving menopause symptoms, that it's plastered all over it and you think it's going to be good. In the same way that if I see a film's got Margot Robbie and I'm going to think it's probably going to be decent. But it's the same thing with menopause ingredients, isn't it?
And these are not, what makes me very sad, and we talked about this, is these are not necessarily patients that can afford all of these supplements as well. And so I've got quite a big deprived community in my practice. And these patients are going out and they don't have the money, but they're still desperately trying. There's menopause clothing lines, there's all kinds of things. And really, actually, what we need to be doing and what we're not doing in general practice is stripping it back and helping people when they're well on the run up to these perimenopausal years to say, right, what's your cholesterol, what's your blood pressure, how are you managing your lifestyle, what can we do to improve, what's your family history of diabetes or premature menopause, all the conditions that might put that woman at higher risk when they're at that stage. So it's that sadness and the ethics behind capitalising on really very vulnerable, overstretched women and with the wrong products and the wrong advice. It makes a lot of the doctors quite angry. Yeah.
It seems like. Let's talk about something that I think for a really long time we thought it was just something that teenagers had to deal with, which is acne. And then I remember years ago on magazines writing about adult acne, and there was a sense of, what a terrible injustice it was to hit your 30s or 40s and have to deal with zits, because surely you'd done your time with them already, like you'd been through it. But there's hormonal acne. There are lots of different types of acne, and it does seem that women are experiencing it more perhaps than previously.
And that's exactly right. So we are seeing this increase in women with what we just describe as adult female acne, and might often be written about as a hormonal acne. And it is very different to, well, not very different, but it is different to the acne of puberty. So there's other factors why this might happen in a woman who's typically over the age of around about 30. And usually it's coming at a time where they perhaps have had their acne slightly controlled by being on an oral contraceptive pill, or they've gone through a hormonal shift and change in pregnancies, or they're now entering this perhaps 10 years before that one day of menopause that's going to happen. So their estrogen levels are up and down. Now, what happens whenever your estrogen levels are down? It means that you've got more of the free testosterone, and often the problem with that is that it can then stimulate these sebaceous glands essentially to make more sebum. But it's also a little bit more than that, because often these sebaceous glands are already slightly primed for it, so they're receiving it. And you then start to develop these signs of acne whenever you're an adult. In terms of treating it is also part of the problem, because if you were to go to see a wonderful GP like Ziggy, then unfortunately Ziggy is slightly restricted in what she can prescribe you, because guidelines are typically focused around the acne in a puberty in children. So the treatment regimens are usually far too harsh with an adult female who has acne and can actually contribute to flaring it. Things like antibiotics, which are often considered first line for teenagers with acne, isn't actually that helpful for adults who have acne, and it's much better controlling it with either hormonal means. And really, it's the topical skincare which is really key, because, again, your normal puberty acne, the preparations are so harsh, as I said, but actually the ingredients in it are usually pretty good. So these retinoids that we would use, so it's trying to get the retinoids and the azelaic acids and things like this at the right percentages delivered into the skin in a way that's not going to be disruptive to the skin barrier. So it's one of many kind of diseases, I think, that really start to flare in that perimenopausal time.
And is that some of the symptoms that a woman will come to you and say, my skin just is different?
Absolutely. So they'll come, in terms of skin, you can actually get patients feeling that their skin's really dry or really itchy, lots of breakouts, particularly kind of around the chin and the lower cheek area that are new. And if you imagine your anxiety and maybe your confidence is already a bit on edge because you're maybe having hot flushes as well, or you're in the middle of delivering a meeting and you have a hot flush. So then if you add in acne, or some, like Emma was saying, some of the kind of rosacea can flare, and eczema, and things that you haven't had for many years coming back, it just all adds into that patient feeling really unwell and in need of decent help to get everything right. On the prescribing, it is quite very frustrating when our formularies are set to things like antibiotics, or there's a drug called spironolactone that might be quite useful, and things that we actually aren't allowed to prescribe. Now, I'm in Scotland, so I know there's prescriptions that are slightly different in England, but accessing the right care is it's really tricky sometimes. So it's getting that individual advice and getting the exactly right balance for you that will help your skin and all of the other symptoms that you might be experiencing.
And in terms of diet, how much of an impact can you have on something like acne just through changing the way that you eat?
I think it's part of the picture. I think there's only so much you can do with diet in some cases. And when I see clients, they'll, one of the questions is, how's your skin? Because it's an indicator of your health overall. So we, look at someone's eyes, you look at their skin, you look at the whole picture. And obviously as a nutritionist, I'm limited to what I can do. So, if I do see a client with skin problems, I'm always going to refer them on to someone else to work collaboratively. But, I think that it goes back to laying those foundations. I don't think you can't choose one food that's going to make a difference to your skin or your menopause. There's no such thing as this magic ingredient. or magic supplement. But I think a lot of them do have a place. But really about nutrition, it's getting your, building your meals around protein, loads of vegetables, eating in a Mediterranean style. And I think if you do that as your foundation, you can then build other things on top of that.
There's a huge emphasis on protein right now, isn't there? Huge.
Yeah.
Do you have any sort of, not guidelines, but what do you think about protein particularly for women experiencing?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because if you look at the research, no one can agree. There's no consensus on how much protein you need, and that's in, our nutrition, but also in the sports field as well. I mean, it's bonkers. And it can range anything from 0.8 grams a kilo of body weight per day, all the way up to 2, 3, 4, if you're a bodybuilder or a rugby player. And a lot of the studies are based on sports people as well. So again, it's difficult to figure it out. And if you look on social media and speak to a lot of personal trainers, there's this emphasis on 30 grams at every meal or 100 grams a day. Whether that's right, I don't know. I think I'm put myself with everyone else. I can't agree either. But I think a sensible approach is to build every meal around your source of protein. So, a large chicken breast, a piece of salmon. It could be some beans, pulses based. But I think if you're sensible about how you put your meals together, you're not far off. You're 25, 30 grams anyway. So I don't think we need to stress ourselves about how much protein we're eating. We just need to build our meals in a sensible way, which is start with your protein, then add all your vegetables, masses and masses of vegetables. You can't eat enough. A little bit of fat, carbohydrates on the side, and maybe a piece of fruit, So it's just keeping it really simple.
It's interesting, isn't it, though? Because protein has gone from being build your meals around protein to another thing to worry about, start measuring it. Like it makes it really complex.
Yeah. And I think, but the other thing as well, you can have too much of a good thing. So if you're not doing loads of exercise, you're not, lifting loads and loads of weights, do you need 3 or 4 protein shakes on top of your meals? Probably not. I mean, you laugh, but people do this stuff. So it's about working out your own personal energy balance, and it's going to be different for everyone.
Let's shift into HRT, which is obviously one of the options available, and the impact that has, because again, it's not a magic bullet, and it could have some impact on the skin.
Do you want to?
Yeah. So when we're looking to the symptoms and trying to decide, so perimenopause is really it's a clinical diagnosis. It should be done through discussion and mapping symptoms. Sometimes patients want a blood test. There is a blood test that might be helpful, but only until the age of 45, and even then it can be a bit confusing. So it should be a clinical diagnosis around your symptoms, what's the pattern, and whether it's going to be worth trying to stabilise out someone's hormones. And then when we're looking at the HRT, what way we're going to give it and how we give it, once we've got those estrogen levels in a better position, it's the changes that we can see, like the skin changes and the central weight gain changes and the hair changes, but there's also a lot of changes in perimenopause that we don't see around the way that we metabolize our cholesterol and what happens with our cholesterol. Our bone health is something that I'm very worried about and interested in. So when you're talking about exercise, actually really important to try and change the type of exercise we do to make sure we're doing strength training and weights and kind of, body, using our body mass as well to get good strength within our bones. Because as Emma and I were talking about earlier, we're seeing those impacts on lots, like for example, our mothers' ages who they weren't really offered HRT, and they're at risk of these kind of osteoporotic issues. So thinking about diet and exercise is really important for that aspect, but HRT can really help with that. If you are the right patient, once you've had your discussion around contraindications and whether you're safe to take it, there's lots of different ways to take it, and taking oral HRT, which means a tablet, has different risk factors to taking it through your skin. So lots and lots of patients can take it safely through their skin. And then we'll start to see the benefits in a lot of those symptoms. So joint pain, hot flushes, mood changes, even, but also then in the skin and the skin improving. So yes, I would say that it can help along with that. But it's not necessarily, actually then treating and managing the skin in itself as an entity is important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So HRT can have huge beneficial effects for the skin. I mean, for some skin conditions, it can actually make high estrogen levels can actually make it worse. So people with some kind of autoimmune conditions, SLE, conditions like this, actually it can make it worse. So people who are in that postmenopausal time, actually, if they've had all of these autoimmune diseases, actually feel quite happy to be in that postmenopausal time because lots of these skin conditions might have settled. But certainly from particularly an aging aspect of the skin, you'll see these positive changes occurring. Usually from an acne perspective of the skin in the right balance, you can see these changes as well improving, and particularly around areas like rosacea with flushing of the skin. Again, you can see it improving with HRT. But it really is in conjunction with personalized skincare, because yes, you can prime the skin and get yourself systemically much better on the inside, but a lot of the changes that we also want to see in effect is because of the correct topical treatment going onto the skin from above. So actually the two of them can work incredibly well together.
Let's also talk about the things that I think, again, I mentioned it, like we probably all feel a bit stressed, we probably all feel a bit tired, but we know that cortisol is not great. We know that maybe we might need to rethink our relationship with caffeine, alcohol, our sugar intake. So there's quite a lot for us to think about, and it's quite a lot to do at the same time. But all of these things can impact not just how our skin looks, but also how we feel. Where do we begin?
Do you want to go?
Yeah, well, I mean, and it's such a good question, and it's a great point, because also when you're not feeling great, it's really hard to make lots and lots of changes at once. So meeting, the patient or the person in the middle. So where are you? What's happening with your life stressors? Where do you, if you're busy at work and you feel you don't have time to eat, can you start to bring something that's maybe a bit more healthy than what's in the vending machine? So all of these changes together can help. So yes, cutting back caffeine, bringing it earlier in the day, absolutely, it helps with sleep. It also really helps with flushing if you reduce your caffeine intake. But if you're saying to an exhausted woman, just give up the caffeine, that's really hard, and we all do that when we're tired for work and we think, oh, just have a few extra coffees. But we all know that then that has the reverse benefit. And likewise with alcohol, of course, cutting back alcohol can help with weight. It can help with cancer risk, actually. And but also it can help with sleep. If we cut back on our alcohol and hot flushing, we know that cutting back alcohol can help. But again, if you try and say to a woman who's all completely exhausted, cut all of these things out at once, it's not going to be sustainable. And a bit like these fad diets, the reason they're fad is that they're not sustainable in the longer term. So looking at the changes that you could make, and then picking one and trying to sustain it for a few weeks, then add in another one, and then add a third one over time, I find is more effective for the person to sustain that for those number of years that we need to sustain it for.
And this really does come back to this whole piece of people taking ownership of how they feel and paying attention, looking at their skin. I think we've said already, but I mean, if you asked me what my skin type was, I know now, because Emma's, I know what skin
gorgeous
size
skin type.
But if you had, even working in beauty, if you had asked me a few years ago what my skin type was, I wouldn't have used my words. I would have started touching my face and going, oh, it's normal. And then I would have told you about the bad things that it does, like when it misbehaves, which actually isn't a skin type, is it? And so knowing what my skin type is will mean that when it starts to fluctuate away from what I believe to be its sort of stasis, I will be able to react a bit more quickly and be able to make better choices, hopefully, and explain it to someone like you in a way that allows you to get me right to where I need to be.
I think that's exactly right. So if we think about the aspects of disease that can occur, typically, say, for example, on the face, so we've got this overlap really between beauty and dermatology and skin health. And we're now kind of living in this space where the two of these things are together because, by improving your skin health, inevitably you're improving the look of your skin. So often people don't like or are dissatisfied with an actual dermatological diagnosis of, sorry to say it, disease of the skin. So you might have melasma or rosacea or photodamage or solar elastosis, which is the term we call for wrinkling. So you might have these things that have happened to your skin, but they don't just happen immediately. There's been a prodrome of that happening for, many, many years before. And the key is, and that's kind of really the aim with Klira is that you can get in and work out what those kind of data points are for you, and then start to make those changes early on. And if it's been a bit too late and you're already in the disease state, well, then it's not too late, because you can then reverse that. And as well as reversing it, you can then stay on the right program so that doesn't come back, because inevitably it will come back. And then, like you say, when you're then going through these kind of states of change, whether it's perimenopause, postmenopause, going on holiday, becoming unwell with some disease from some other kind, well, you're well equipped to know what to do to try and keep your skin in that kind of middle ground, so that you're not going to delve back into getting your flares of rosacea again, your acne again, your melasma again.
I know that I think all of you are going to get the opportunity to sign up for this and have this experience, but I cannot tell you what it was like to do the questionnaire, to get my skin size, and then to watch the video where you told me what my skin size means. Because it was like having some sort of like tarot reading. How does she know? Well, dermatology is how she knew. But it was like, yes, that's exactly how my skin behaves. And it's so brilliant. And again, it's a word that gets overused in the menopause space, but it's quite empowering to be able to go, oh, I can now repeat that. That's what my skin does. That's how my skin behaves. So it is this personalised piece, and also the evidence base, which all of you are so stringent about. It's this evidence-based advice, the ingredients in Klira, and also what you recommend to people. Well,
it's the evidence base and the.
Is that Paradise City, Guns N' Roses?
It's the evidence base and the type of evidence base. So I believe, Klira, I can't remember now how many research papers have all been mapped together. I know that Emma has been working scientifically for decades on this, so it's incredibly well mapped to science. And a bit like the supplement space, it's like, actually, it's the right kind of evidence that's really important in terms of able to scientifically prove that this is correct advice.
I think that's exactly right. It's the right kind of evidence. Yes. So, people can make claims on studies that are perhaps not particularly well done, peer-reviewed studies to make the claim, or perhaps not even a scientific study at all. But it's understanding the right type of evidence and being able to then, quite often those things are medicines, which is why you have to see a doctor or join Klira to be able to get those right kind of treatments. But it is exactly that. It's the right kind of evidence, and not to be dissuaded by the noise, and that every single person is different.
And it's so confusing, and I think many of you might have watched the Panorama documentary last week about menopause. And there was a section at the beginning where I think it's Dr. Anne-Marie Boylan from the Centre of Evidence-Based Medicine was going through some of these products that are freely available on the high street that say that they have some sort of menopausal benefit. And one of them had 42 studies, but none of them meant anything. And I swear I watched it, rewound it, and was like, Anne-Marie, say that again and say it slowly. It was the hottest thing I've seen on my TV screen in a long time, because it was so nice to actually, you kind of know that there's a lot of terrible information out there, but it can be really difficult to pick it out when it looks legitimate, because they say 42 studies.
That's exactly right. It's hard to pick it out. I find it hard to pick it out. Yeah.
I think as well, it's when you see those adverts when they say, 75% of women have experienced a reduction in hot flushes over a 4-week period, and then you look at the small print, and it was a study on, if that, but you just, people see the headlines, and also, going back to what you were saying about, a lot of these women can't afford it. Yeah. I mean, there are supplements out there that are, £200 a month. And you look at the ingredients, think, well, hang on a minute, this is just a multivitamin and a fancy shiny tin.
But I think what it speaks to, though, is an appetite and a desire to do something positive, to make a positive change. It's just that there's too much interference to getting to the right information, which is, I think, what we've tried to demonstrate here this morning, is that actually it's about advocating for yourself. It's about having a conversation with your GP, being in tune with what's going on so that you can help them help you, and the same with your skin, and the same also with your diet.
We talked about it, how it really is this kind of window of opportunity where by using this time, this is the time then to help you live better, helps your skin live better for not necessarily longer, but the time that you're alive, it will be better. And this is the time to do that.
Actually, I've never heard anyone describe perimenopause, menopause, or postmenopause as a window of opportunity. And that might be the greatest thing that has happened here today. Really is. Because I think it can be seen as such a sort of, like there'll be a bell will toll and everything will go black and white and it will rain and there will be clouds and it's going to be tough from here on out. And the idea that actually, no, this is a time where you can make really significant changes that will help you live better, potentially for longer.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And that's one of the key messages that I would like to get across today. And certainly there's a lot of fear. I think even teenagers are quite frightened about it now. They're hearing things. Millennials are hearing things and they're saying, gosh, I don't want that to happen. But actually, it's embracing it, because it will, if you're lucky enough to live long enough, you're going to experience your menopause. It's a natural stage in a woman's life. But we can optimize so much in that window up to the menopause and then in the postmenopause for that better health, and I think should be a positive message.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of my clients come to me and it's that realisation that they've hit their 40s or their 50s and they need to make changes, or they want to make changes, and saying that they want to enjoy the second half of their life and make it better. I mean, who doesn't want that?
How great is that? Yeah. To sound like Ina Garten, the barefoot contestant. She always says, how great is that? So we're going to open the floor to some questions. I'm sure I hope that there are some questions for our incredible panel.
There were loads of questions in the last session.
Yes.
Mine's not so much of a question, but I very much love that discussion about... I agree. I am one of those. I don't know where I am. I'm like 51, so who knows what stage I'm in. But I just think there is fear amongst this time. And I think particularly my generation, because no one ever talked to us about it. Yeah. So I personally hit 45, had a deluge of symptoms and went, what the hell is this? Now, interestingly, I went along to my GP at 40. I was called in to have like a health check because I hit 40. At no point did they say, oh, you're 40. This might be about Catherine. Look out for these symptoms. My mum didn't tell me. Social media didn't exist really at the time to tell me. So I think my generation that has gone very vocal to talk about it, to say, so that younger women don't have that fear. Because for us, it was like, oh, what the hell is happening? So I think having discussions like this, particularly with younger women in the room, I just want to say thank you, because hopefully they are going to hit their 40s. And when they start to get symptoms, they're not going to be in the wilderness like I was, thinking I've got dementia and wondering why my skin was being raped off. So sorry, I haven't asked a question, but I just want to say thank you for having this discussion, particularly with younger women. That means that they won't have that in the future.
I don't know if I can comment very quickly, but I think that is absolutely key, is that we share the information, because there's a lot of just support you can give others, and actually recognising symptoms. Someone says, oh, that could be perimenopause. A lot of the work we were doing with the Women's Health Plan is trying to say, when a woman comes to a cardiologist with palpitations, ask them where they are in their hormonal journey. Why are you not doing that? When a woman sees an endocrinologist with sweats, then ask them if they could be perimenopausal. So now in Scotland, every time you get your smear, the nurse who does the smear is meant to give you a leaflet and talk to you about perimenopause. We've also changed the entire Scottish Schools programme, and a few of us doctors wrote teaching materials for primary 5, which is your year 6, and your primary 5 and primary 6-year-olds in Scotland now will hear about endometriosis, difficult periods, what's a normal period, what's an abnormal period at that age, and also that we've stopped separating the boys out while the girls get their period chat. So that is so fantastic. So my little daughter, who's 12, was coming home and talking about her vulva to my husband, who was like, oh my God, what's this? And I think it was amazing, and he's been so open about learning about her understanding of periods, and and so young boys, and so also then in high school, the word perimenopause and menopause will be taught to every single high school child in Scotland, and I think England is following suit. So because we don't want people to be scared, and we don't want people to go to a doctor and not know about that this might happen to them, because of that window to help with their heart and their bone and their relationships and their mood. So yeah.
You've just made me think that I think particularly like going through puberty, if you had heavy periods or you got acne or anything like that, you were seen as unlucky. And if you're going through perimenopause and menopause and you're getting exaggerated symptoms, it's seen as, oh, they're unlucky. Because there's also this kind of thing of the ideal is that you navigate it and no one notices, not even you. But actually, I think unlucky is going to go out of the equation, because I think everyone's going to understand that their own specific journey is unique and nothing's unlucky or bad or wrong.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's nothing to do about being unlucky, and everyone will experience some form of a symptom. They might not recognise it as being part of it. You know, you alluded to brain fog, and that feeling that you might have an early dementia starting, and that's so. And it's partly because of that drop in the estrogen, how it affects your working memory, but also your sleep is affected, so you're not laying down memories in the same way. You're more stressed because your sleep is affected. You're in the care sandwich, and you're a bit more stressed with things at work. So all of those things affect it. But you're right. It's something that's not even necessarily recognised as a symptom, or suddenly getting itchy skin for the first time, or a recurrence of your eczema, or resurgence of your rosacea. It might not be the typical things. But, if you're lucky enough to live that long for this to happen, whether you want to recognise it or whether you want to stay in denial or whatever, it doesn't matter, because it will happen.
Any other questions? Hello.
I guess I will represent the other side, the younger ones who maybe haven't hit that time yet. But, it is wonderful to hear and reassuring, because, there was different kind of fear that maybe what we have, because we have mums who will go through it, and my mum had terrible hot flushes, and then they say, oh, it's hereditary, you're going to get it the same, and you keep thinking, well, it's inevitable, I'm just going to have to get through it. So if there was advice to people in their, even if 20s, 30s, whatever it is, and 40s, that you could give, that is almost like a practical on what to keep your eye on, what to look out for when it comes to diet, food, body health, skin, that they can kind of spread to the masses, that there is something that you can start doing quite early on.
So my piece of advice for the skin is to understand the type of skin you have and what potentially you might be at risk of developing, and putting good practices into place early. So you're using the right comfortable cleanser, moisturizer, SPF, and then obviously your Klira Special that's formulated for you. But you really most people don't need much more than that. It's really simple, really stripped back, and really has to be personalized for you. And then the second thing is, if you're experiencing these exaggerated symptoms, so some people who do get horrendous flushing, Ziggy will talk about this, I'm sure, in terms of hormonal replacement, but even medical treatments there are certain medicines that you can take to control flushing. You can have Botox injections to control your flushing. There's lots of things that can be done now. So if you happen to fall into these extreme variants of it, there are things that can be done that often people just had to put up with or hide away or navigate as if it didn't really matter. But all of those things can be done.
I don't know if I can comment quickly. I think getting told that you're going to do exactly what your mum does is a bit like when you're pregnant and everyone in the shops and everyone tells you they're terrible birthing stories. Is there no good stories out there? So first of all, you can't really say, oh, you're going to do exactly what your mum's done. And when you were mentioning about your mum, our mums will just say, oh, it was fine, I can't remember it. Because my mum's nearly 80. So it's I don't think those kind of stories are helpful. It's just the key message is understand your body. What are your habits when you're under stress? What do you turn to? What can I look to change? For hot flushing, the other excellent thing is definitely cutting back caffeine, increasing exercise, cutting out alcohol at that time, and increasing your exercise really helps with that. It's called the thermoregulatory gait. So estrogen keeps that gait static, but when it's fluctuant, that's why we get flushes and night sweats, and then so things that you can do, a lot of lifestyle things you can do. But the other great thing is, with all the attention perimenopause and menopause is getting, the drug companies are finally going, hang on, this is a new emerging space. So I know that there's a brand new drug coming out next year which actually has no hormone in it. So if you're a cancer sufferer, you can have this medication that's for hot flushes and has quite good evidence. So there's a lot of emerging science as well. And around we were talking about the vaginal microbiome and the microbiome. Actually, there's quite good emerging science, but the science needs to be robust, and it needs to be randomized controlled trials, and it needs to catch up with the population needs. So, yeah.
And Charlotte, you don't get loads of love for this, but you sometimes talk about carbs and maybe giving them a miss.
Probably enemy number one if I mention no carbs. So I'm not going to say no carbs, but I think one of the things you can do, I think, for healthier hormones is to just stop snacking. Honestly, it makes the biggest difference to your health, to your energy, your sleep, your waistline, your appetite, everything. And I think it's more about when we eat and sort of less about what we're eating. Because if you're eating 3 meals a day, you can have your bar of chocolate, just have it in one of those meals. Or if you're having your carbs, have it as part of the meal. If you're having a glass of wine, small glass of wine, have it with your meal, But it's this blood sugar roller coaster we set off if we're constantly eating, because our bodies don't get a break. So our stomach doesn't get a break, our brain doesn't get a break, and all of those signals travelling through our body are just on overdrive the whole time. So if you
say fasting is a good, because that's obviously having quite a lot of fasting, and people are saying
it's
like 36 hours past or whatever it is.
When it comes to nutrition, you never get a yes or no answer. So it depends, I think, is the answer. In perimenopause, I don't think fasting for long periods of time is a good idea, because you're putting yourself under more stress, and as Sigi was talking about, the cortisol response is just going to go, flying. But you can integrate time-restricted eating into a normal day. So you could have your breakfast at 7 or 8, your lunch 5 hours later, your dinner 5 hours later. You're introducing that intermittent fasting between your meals during the day, and then you're also doing time-restricted eating because you're finishing your evening meal, then not eating anything until breakfast. So that's kind of hormone 101, I think, when it comes to nutrition.
Hi, thank you for today. Actually, really informative talk. It's really great. I have a question around access, and I'm not entirely sure how to articulate it, or if there even is like a straightforward answer. But I work with a lot of women who come from extremely marginalised communities, and beauty is actually one of the main topics that always comes up whenever we have our sort of sessions and we talk and we forget about life. And beauty is always like one of the things, whether it's talking about the latest makeup that's out, or like procedures, or whatever it is. And actually something I notice a lot is that these women aren't necessarily able to access a dermatologist, or easy access to, or actually even just trust with GPs because of previous negligence and things like that, and or even, let alone hiring a nutritionist. Like that's just something they wouldn't even consider. So I'm just wondering what is your advice when it comes to women who come from much lower income backgrounds, and how they're able to access skincare, because they wouldn't have sort of money lying around where they can purchase things all the time to experiment what works for their skin, or like if they're booking appointments with GPs, I'm guessing it's like a referral to a dermatologist. So even those, all of these ways of like accessing information and help from specialists, like how does that work?
Do you want to start from the GP perspective?
I mean, you've touched on something that I'm incredibly passionate about. So the first thing is obviously where's the information and how are we presenting it. So in Scotland we've done a lot of public health campaigns where we've got BSL interpreter. It's interpreted into 70 different languages and dialects, and all the written material that's on the NHS website anyway is downloadable in all the different languages. So that's to try and encourage patients to come forward and speak to their GP. Accessing a GP service is a completely different, it's very strained up and down the country with workforce. But then there's also about that trust, and also about the culture and discussing perimenopause, and what, in some cultures they'll very much embrace it and say it's a second spring. So in our Asian cultures, Japanese cultures, they talk about it as a second spring, and it's really, really positive. But then I'll see in some of my kind of Pakistani communities and South Indian communities where it's, we just have to get through with it. And so we're trying to break down that barrier about actually talking about it, because everyone, it's understanding that it's okay to come and seek help, and when you do seek help that you understand it in the right language, or with maybe translation services. And there's a lot of good research that shows prescribing for HRT has exponentially increased up and down the country in the last 2 or 3 years. But when you break it down to population data, it is often our Caucasian middle-class women that feel they can advocate, and they're talking about it with each other. Maybe they're in a workplace that's maybe a more corporate environment, so they're very supportive of menopause care for that group. So there are basically models of care that we're trying to look at to increase equity across the whole of the UK, but it's a complex thing. But it's about talking about perimenopause, side effects, symptoms in these wider communities, and going out to community outreach. There's projects like going out to speak to imams to then run sessions, at Saturday, some of the religious outlets as well in Scotland. So I can't really speak to England, but we are very, very keen to increase equity of access.
In terms of access for actual skin care, the only way essentially to access a dermatologist where you're not paying for it is through the NHS service. And that is problematic because you have to access the GP first to then be able to access the dermatologist. And even if you have a very good GP who is then able to make the referral to you for dermatology services, the waiting list is very long. It's probably around about, you're 5 years in your area. Yeah. So it's usually around about 2 years. So it is a really difficult service to even be able to access. When it comes to private healthcare, it is particularly expensive. And that's often where this gap of skincare and marketing is kind of, very kind of opportunistic in who they will often prey to. There's lots of information that's really good online information, again, that goes through the NHS websites on how to look after the skin. And lots of good resources from places like the British Association of Dermatologists. But, one of the resources, and it's not an inexpensive service to access, it's still cheaper than going to see a dermatologist, is using something like Klira, for example. So you will then be able to do the consultation, which is essentially a free consultation. You're given basic skincare advice, how to look after the skin properly. And if there is a disease state or in an attempt to get your skin better, then you have your formula made up for you. From a cost perspective element to this, it is not accessible for everyone. It is a luxury product. But actually for some people who are already falling prey to the marketing, they may be spending a lot of money on the wrong stuff anyway. So it's a redirection of those funds if they, for example, they have melasma, which means that they really are not going out in public, or their rosacea is stopping them from, interacting in a certain way. So it's often money that's thought to be well spent, and at least it's got the evidence behind it to kind of make the skin better. Sorry, I interrupted.
I wasn't really going to ask a question. I was just going to talk about my personal experience in trying to get HRT. Was horrific. Mm-hmm. And that goes the same for my whole friendship group. Yeah. And you have to fight and literally be having a nervous breakdown every week at your GP for weeks on end to get the prescription. I do think it is changing. It has changed in the last 2 years, but it is incredibly hard to get. They don't just give it to you. I had to do hormone tests for years. They always came back negative because it was something I'd been experiencing for a long period of time. But people won't entertain that in your 40s. They just won't. They don't want to hear it, and it's not a priority because we are still very much in a patriarchal society. I do think the fact that there are so many discussions that are happening and documentaries has been incredibly positive, because it's now out there in the culture and is being discussed. So I think that has meant that more GPs are getting trained. But certainly 2 years ago, you had to go through a specialist menopause centre with a wait list of 2 years. And I'm like, I cannot wait 2 years. This is happening now.
So I think that the trend for that is definitely, in some practices, remains exactly the same. Although there are, like, for example, the training that Ziggy will do to other GPs, the trend and the push is to move that. In Ireland...
Davina, recall that documentary went out and that changed things overnight.
Yeah.
That was a couple of years ago.
Well, in Ireland, just last week, HRT is now free for all women. So, you know, this change is definitely happening, but it's very kind of potluck who you see, what they might suggest to you.
As well, so I've got a friend of mine who's a little bit older than me, and they're now trying to get her off the HRT because she's gone through the menopause. But she's like, you still want me to go to work? How am I supposed to manage my life without HRT? Yeah. What would your advice be? Should you continue with HRT? Should you stop once you've gone through the menopause?
Yeah, that's a great
What's the
question.
reality? Like, is it just they don't want to be paying money for you to be on HRT? Yeah. Let's not ignore that.
Well, I hope not, but yeah, to pick up on 2 points, if that's okay. Yeah. One thing is, almost in defence of the doctors, that what happened is that around about 24 or 5 years ago, there was 3 studies that came out. One was called the Million Women Study, and those are the studies that then the media picked up on and said, HRT is deadly, nobody prescribe it. So if I think about when I was training, that's when these studies came out. So when I was doing my exams, all of my tutors were like, you can't prescribe it, so we'll not examine you on it. So there's a whole cohort of doctors who are now of that age going, well, hang on, what are we meant to do for all these symptoms? So that's why the wave has changed. So the doctors in between that, so older than me, probably had a good 15 to 20 years of practice where it was practically told to them that it would be malpractice to give HRT, okay? So what's happening is there's a big wave of other doctors like us coming through going, where's the science? Let's look at these studies. These studies are flawed. This is incorrect. And then in the meantime, Davina and Kate Muir and various people have done more of a kind of journalistic investigation, which then the media's picked up and said, oh, hang on, all these women have not been treated correctly. So the science has been picked apart, and now we know there's a lot of window of opportunity. So a lot of doctors are just in that. I'm very specialist in it, so I'm really interested in it. So I've made sure my whole team understands. But if you come to my practice, you will get it, and you will get good service. Down the road you might not. So one of the big things that we're trying to do up and down the country is make sure excellent education is out there for free for all the nurses and doctors and pharmacists that might be involved. So there is a big wave of change, but slightly in defence of the reason why it was hard is people didn't understand it.
Literally saying that they hadn't had the training in order to be able to prescribe.
Yeah, and that has changed. And in terms of when you should stop it, I don't want to give advice specifically on your friend because that needs an individual discussion. But again, for decades they say, as soon as, stop straight away. And now the tide is turning and we say, well, actually, let's take the women's individualised risk. Once you've been on HRT for 5 years, some of the risk profiles with being on it change. So your breast cancer, some of your risks will change after 5 years of use. But that 5 years of use, the clock starts of your natural age of menopause. So from 51, roughly, to then the late 50s, then you should start to talk about risk and benefit. Check, has the woman's weight changed? Has the cholesterol changed? Has she had another condition in the meantime? So it's an individualised discussion. But there's now no blanket kind of stop at this age. No, I would say that's incorrect.
Does staying on HRT help to keep your skin and your bones and your brain and everything operating at a more effective level?
So again, that's a fantastic, interesting discussion. So 2 weeks ago, I was at this thing called the Menopause Academy, and Dame Leslie Regan was there. So she's your Women's Health Ambassador, and she was saying she's on HRT and she'll stay on it for life. And then there was a professor from Oxford there who's never tried it and has a family history of osteoporosis. And so there was actually a heated debate. Kate Muir was running the debate, and all of us in the room were specialists. So you've got to take it, again, individualised on yourself. Where are you at? What's your symptoms? What's your general health like? But in terms of managing, theoretically, once you're postmenopausal, all your hormones have settled. Mm-hmm. So it's much more about taking that individual discussion, I would say.
Okay. Because essentially your collagen drops right off when you go through perimenopause and then menopause. So staying on HRT, does that keep your collagen preserved to a certain degree? How does that work?
Yes, so collagen is affected by your estrogen levels and the kind of cells that make it. So around that time where your estrogen levels start to drop, then yes, it does. So it affects what's called your intrinsic aging. You still have your extrinsic aging, which is caused by the environment around you, your exposure to UV, the food that you eat, the oxidative stress that you cause to yourself. And it's both of these things in balance that affect your collagen. So yes, undoubtedly, once your estrogen levels start to reduce, then whether that's exogenous or endogenous estrogen, then that will have an effect on the collagen that you have, yeah.
So to save the skin, you may want to continue with the
You can't take it just for that. But you can use Klira.
But that's what it's good. Actually, topical treatments that can then sustain skin elasticity and things absolutely have a place for life, really, particularly in the postmenopause, because it's never really too late to try and improve that.
So there we go. Was there another hand? There wasn't. No. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you to Emma.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, expertly managed.